Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for attending our first webinar of 2024. We've had a short break this year because it's been a very busy start for us, but we're now back. So to date, we have over 120,000 views of our webinars. So I'm really pleased to be kicking off this year with a roundtable with some special guests who I'll ask to introduce themselves shortly. As some of our repeat viewers will know, we'll try our best to answer all your questions. So please ask them here on YouTube. You can email us at webinar@proctorgroup.com or you can DM us on Twitter. If you're watching this at a later date, which of course a lot of our viewers do, then please feel free to email us at the same address if you have any additional questions. On our webinar page, you can download your personalised CPD certification, and if you want to book a meeting with one of our staff or have anything particular you want to ask us, then just get in touch on that page. Just a quick date for the diary. Our next webinar is on Friday, the 3rd of May. So please save the date, usual time of 10 a.m. Further details will follow, but essentially it's going to be all around pitched roof designs. It's going to be quite a technical webinar as per some of our previous ones. So early registration will be open at the end of this webinar. If you've registered, you'll receive a follow-up email with all of these links and a link to the replay. It also really helps us, so if you enjoy the webinar, please give us a thumbs up or subscribe to our YouTube channel, and that will keep you informed of any developments, anything that's coming along for Proctor Group, and you'll receive automatic updates. So please feel free to do that on YouTube. So today we're going to be discussing everything around bridging and solving the performance gap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the panel, I'll go around and just ask them to give a very quick introduction to themselves, and I guess just a very quick overview around the whole topic of closing the performance gap. So Tom, if I could start with you, please. You've got sort of 3 minutes or so to introduce yourself and give us your brief thoughts.
Thank you very much, Keira. My name's Tom Cox. I've worked with Saint-Gobain for the last 18 years, a bit of a life sentence, but my career has pretty much tracked where regulations have gone. Started back in the early 2000s when U values were king, and it was all about component performance. Moved into component development, on into solutions development, so combinations of components to form elements. And then now more looking at how combinations and components and considered design give building level outputs. So starting to concentrate buildings around the end user, and then how we can really start to test that. What sort of systems or tests can qualify whole house testing, and really driving that piece around qualifying performance, assessing against modeling, and refining that modeling and performance and delivery to really try to close the performance gap. One of the big projects we've recently been doing, which has been really informative in this area, is with Salford University. We've built a full-scale house in there in conjunction with Barratt Homes, and we're currently going through an awful lot of testing, predominantly focusing on the Future Homes Standard in England, but looking at how full building testing can be qualified, can be scalable, and be commercially viable. So there's a lot coming from that, which hopefully will inform this topic.
Thank you very much, Tom. Iain, if I can come to you next, please.
Morning, Keira. Morning, everybody. My name is Iain Fairnington. I'm the Technical Director of the Proctor Group. I've been here 32 years, straight from 5 years at university, in the building industry. It's an interesting topic, closing the gap. You look back when I was at university, in those 5 years, in my summers, I did working on site as a labourer, just to make some money and get a different view of the construction industry, which is quite enlightening. As a student labourer, you're bottom of the pile, and you actually get to see what happens in real life compared to the 6 months you've just learned in university. And having looked at the drawings when I was on site, I noticed that the building wasn't going up quite like the drawings. So obviously, as a young lad, I asked the questions, should you not do it this way? Because that's what's in the drawings. they smiled at me and said, "Don't be silly, son. We haven't got time to do that. Time was everything. Just get it done." Part of my duties was to put glass wool in between the studs, basically because it wasn't a very nice job. So that was a student labourer's job. And I took great care in doing that. But again, I was told, "You haven't got time to do it that quick, son. Just get it stuffed in there and get the plasterboard on before anybody notices." So it's quite interesting to see how sight and theory goes in practice. So it's been interesting. So I started work with Proctors, got some fantastic products, developed some new products thinking this is brilliant, the industry will love this. Soon learned that you could never use the term bulletproof because there's no such thing in the construction industry. If there's a wrong way to do it, first of all, that's the way they'll do it until you tell them different. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this. There's lots of knowledge on the panel with some great views, so I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Iain. Stewart?
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me along. Iain, if you've got a list of houses that you worked on as a teenager, I'd like to know where they are so I can avoid them if possible. I started my career straight out of school. I got a job as a apprentice architectural technician, and I spent 5 years of my life designing the details of buildings and going to site and experiencing exactly what you've experienced, Iain. I would go on site and say, "Look, there's my drawing. Why haven't you done what I asked?" And I got a similar reaction on site, just clip around the ear, "Don't be silly, laddie," and off you go. I did that for 5 years, got made redundant when when Tesco acquired William Lowe supermarkets many, many moons ago, showing my age here. I then got a job selling flat roofs and roof gardens for a company called Bowder, a very well-regarded high-end flat roof and roof garden company. That was really when the penny dropped for me. When I was selling specifications to architects, I realised that bit was actually quite easy. Sitting down and doing a CPD presentation, showing people how amazing your products were, how good the guarantees were, and product design, workmanship, everything under this one insurance umbrella. What I didn't realise was that when it got to site, everyone tried to change the specification. The QS was incentivised to change it, the main contractor, the subcontractor. There was price fixing going on between subcontractors. That was a whole other education for me that I did for about 5 years. And then we did a roof in a shopping centre in Glasgow that leaked like a sieve. And I don't know why it leaked. And we hired someone to come and do a thermographic survey on the roof. And I had an epiphany on that roof because this chap arrived at midnight in a t-shirt in Scotland in January and pulled out this thing that looked like a Russian camcorder out of his beat-up Mondeo. And on the roof at like 1 o'clock in the morning, he asked me for £3,500 to do a thermographic survey. And I thought, I could do that better than him. I know roofing better than him. I know architecture better than him. I know how to treat customers better than him. And I know how business works, that you can't ask the sales rep for £3,500 on a roof at midnight. So I raised a bit of venture capital from a friend, but early seed funding from a friend called Dave Jones, who wrote Grand Theft Auto and Lemmings. He wrote David Beckham's Soccer. He was a director at Epic, wrote Fortnite. I raised a bit of money from him, set up a company, limited liability, VAT registered, all that proper stuff day one, bought a decent camera, and slowly grew the business from just me and my brother to raising venture capital to writing software to ultimately selling it 2 years ago to the Mears Group. So in that 22 years, we've surveyed about 500,000 buildings. We've got tons of evidence of half-filled cavities, porous brickwork, delaminating render, just proving that performance gap. And where we are now, as Mears, we've just invested about £500,000 in a Google Streets vehicle that's got 4 thermal cameras mounted on the roof. It's got a 360-degree visual camera on the roof, and it's got a LiDAR system on the roof. So we can now survey buildings accurate to within a centimetre in every direction, both sides of the street, ground and first floor, at 30 miles an hour. and give you accurate 3D drawings with the photographs and the thermal images overlaid, but it's accurate enough that we can pull in the UPRN number and therefore the EPC from the EPC register. So we can give clients a more holistic portfolio appraisal based on real life, not what the EPC says. What thermal imaging says is, here's your half-filled cavity. That's why you've got damp and mold issues inside. That's why kids are dying in social housing. So that's not to get on my high horse, but that's where we are. We're trying to help reduce that performance gap, but also help save little kids' lives in houses, help achieve net zero, help eliminate fuel poverty, and do it in a pragmatic, data-driven manner. But that was at least 3 minutes. Sorry.
It was. No, that's great. Thank you very much, Stewart. Raymond, we can come to you last but not least. And you'll need to unmute, sorry.
You can see I'm an expert in software and Zoom settings every morning. Morning, everyone. Raymond McGurk. Been in the industry just pushing 40 years from specification, manufacturing, consultancy, off-site manufacturing, and software development as well. So quite a range, but all within the construction industry. Our businesses are involved at planning stage, so we see the concept of what's going on in the architect's mind and the developer's mind, all the way through to building warrants. So we see that picture being built the whole way through, and also through to completion stage where certification is issued. So things like acoustic testing, air leakage testing, and ventilation testing. So we see that whole breadth of what's required. The industry's not all bad. I think that's something we shouldn't beat ourselves up too much. It's easy to do. It's easy to do, but there are a significant amount of issues out there, and I think it is widely recognised that there's a gap between how homes are designed to perform and how they actually perform once built. And until that performance gap's closed, I think new homes they'll always meet the energy requirements on paper in terms of compliance and certification. But not in reality, and I think that's probably going to be a big part of today. And I think the performance of any building is determined by its fabric, its systems, its energy usage, its occupants. So there's a whole plethora of things within there. It's not one individual thing. And each of these facets when the building, I've got different insights and different performance levels at how the overall building will perform. And I think that's the issue in our industry is how that overall building performs as opposed to individual components. And that's where it breaks down, and when the fights and the problems occur about who's kind of hit for that. And I think a lack of monitoring and feedback following occupancy is one of the biggest things that I've seen over a whole load of time there. And it meaning problems are really identified or even celebrated, because there are some good performing buildings out there, but nobody really talks about them. We always talk about the negatives. And also site behaviour or usage within houses. We can see that in the social housing market. There's quite a wide range of how people use houses and in the private development market. So I think a lot of that kind of stuff needs looked at. And I think design assumptions don't properly reflect the in-use performance of buildings. That's the big thing. We create certificates, whether they're SAP and we put this sticker on the wall and we take that as being the most meaningful thing. And in reality, it's just a technical document to meet regulations. What I think is really interesting is if we compare ourselves against the car industry, the construction industry, we don't even get off the starting block at all. The way the car industry monitors itself, evaluates itself, and improves itself. So I think I'm really looking forward to just hearing some of the questions. And I also spend a lot of time on site. I'm on site probably 30 times a year. It's one of my oddities in life. I actually like being in and about site to see what's going on. So hopefully that gives you a feel of what we do. We've developed a lot of software with the guys behind AutoSci. We've simplified the thermal modelling tools, and we've got a whole range of monitoring software out there as well. So we see it from the beginning, and we're still involved at the end. So hopefully we can share some other information during the presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Raymond. And in my rush and excitement for our first webinar, I forgot to introduce myself. So my name is Keira Proctor, and I'm the Managing Director here at the Proctor Group, and certified web host for all of our webinars. So I've had some reasonably good questions in through email, which is fantastic. So please keep them coming. Again, please feel free to post them on the YouTube feed. And we'll just get round to as many as we can. We're aiming to probably finish up between 20 past 11, depending how many people are still listening and asking questions. So please feel free to direct them to a specific host. You've heard kind of their backgrounds if you would like anyone asked specifically. Otherwise, I'll just fire them out to people as they come in. So I've got quite a general one in here from Tim via email. So Stewart, I'm going to pick on you first. What is the starting point with solving the performance gap?
Why did you pick me first, Keira?
I don't know. I just thought, why not?
I think from the drawing board, it's about getting robust details. It's about agreeing, like if you could agree the end performance criteria right at the start, that's a good place to begin. But getting someone to hold on to the specification and ensure that's what gets delivered is really, really difficult. You need robust systems and processes and testing mechanisms in place to ensure that. So massive amount of training required for architects and technicians at the offset. There's all sorts of contractual things that cause problems as well. Like, again, not to prattle on about my age, but back in my day, architects used to be quite important people. They used to sit at the top of a pyramid and dictate down what happened. But ever since things like PFI and PPP contracts and design and build came about, the contractor, and I know I work for a tier 1 contractor, so I need to be careful what I say here, but sometimes contractors can have too much power and can override what the architect says. So things like when someone says, hey, put on Proctor product XYZ or eco and approved, that's an opportunity for someone to save money and change a spec and break it. But two products on site look very, very similar to the naked eye. One Rockwool product looks very like an SIG product, and you wouldn't really know unless you were an expert. So Clerk of Works, people actually on site testing things and eyes and ears on site, that's a huge part of the solution, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, just onto that, Iain, clerks of work, we've had a chat about this in the past. Are they still employed? If they're not, why not? Are they still around? Is this a current topic that, is it a current function that's still carried out?
Yeah, it's a great point. Clerk of Works, I know I mentioned that when I was on the sites. One of the points was to try and get the plasterboard up before the Clerk of Works came around. He was on constant watch, or we had him on constant watch. But I think the Clerk of Works seems to be more of an older trade now. You see it sometimes in housing associations, but it's not as common as it used to be. And I think that's a bit of a problem, actually. We've all had our scrapes with the Clerk of Works, I'm sure, and got the scars to prove it. But I think genuinely the Clerk of Works was doing a good job, and he was trying to get what was on the drawing board delivered on site. So they were very careful, very diligent to make sure that what was done was as per the drawing board. So sure, that's probably what you were having the problems with in the past, So I think Clerk of Works, I think it would be useful to be used more often, because it's that making sure the client is looked after and the client gets what he's wanting in a robust format. And it was that check, I think, is something that we should encourage, to make sure that what's designed is actually getting done as best as possible. So I would certainly support Clerk of Works coming back in.
Absolutely. And I wonder how much of it is just a dated term. They're still around, and there's a few comments from Stephen here that there's still a role and they're employed by many, but perhaps it's just a more dated terminology. Ray, is the industry better at fixing things than getting them right first time, in your opinion?
That's the old chestnut, isn't it? I think that the amount of work that goes on site and the whole system of sort of, you know, from the start of planning to finishing a building is enormous. It's enormous. It's staggering, you know, what goes on. I think from our experience that even in the fixing of things, it takes a long time. If you go into some of the local Facebook pages to do with developments, that's an up and coming area. You'll see dozens of people complaining that they can't get things fixed. They've been waiting for 6 months or not. I'm a great believer in trying to get it right first time. I think it's very easy to say that. And even in our own business, we don't get everything right first time, but we aim for that. But I think the industry eventually fixes itself in isolated problems. But I'm a great believer in trying to get things done first time. And I think there's a significant lack of training in the industry from a site operative point of view. We need to get our people certified from a compliance point of view in terms of submitting regulations. We need to test our equipment. We've got all this certification every year from BRE to Elmhurst to a whole plethora of things. But the most important person is the person delivering on site, the tradesperson who's actually doing the work. And once they've qualified, from my experience, there's not a lot of kind of monitoring or evaluation of that person, how good they are on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. My cars probably get more care and attention on a yearly basis, whether they're fit for purpose, than somebody on site. So yeah, I think that the industry is famous for fixing things and maybe not learning, and I think that's the bit that I would hang out there is that gap between just why don't we just try and do it better first time more of the time. I think that's where I would come from.
Thank you very much.
Can I
Ian.
just add to that? It's a great example you're given, Raymond. I think robust details, the acoustics robust details. Stewart mentioned robust details earlier, but the acoustic robust details project has been really successful, I think. It's taken the dark art out of acoustics a bit. So our acoustic flooring suffered from it because that dark art was taken out. But you know, it shows that you can. The developer had nowhere to go with. You had to design that, and it was already built in safety factor that even if they designed it that way and it didn't perform exactly, it was robust enough that it would still pass. Was at a presentation yesterday where Robust Details presented what their results were, and it's fantastic results. From all the testing they've done, maybe 5% is not meeting robust details, but still meeting building regs. And of that 5%, maybe 0.5% is actually failing the acoustic results. So that's a great example of making sure nobody changes a robust detail spec because it's just not worth it. So, you know, there's quite a lot can be taken from something like that. Going back to the thermal worlds that we're all involved in, our younger days doing U values and things like that. You know, if there was a robust detail for that kind of thing, using the likes of Stewart's thermal imaging would be really good.
Stuart, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, just briefly before we move off the Clerk of Works, the Institute of Clerk of Works would be quite upset if we heard everyone saying, do they still exist? There are still tens of thousands of Clerk of Works out there. I presented to a group of them in Belsill, just outside Glasgow, about 3 months ago. But I would have to be honest, they were a lovely bunch of guys, really nice group of guys, all guys. And I don't think there was anyone in the room less than 50 years old. It was not a young man's room at all, which says something.
Mm-hmm.
Noted. Tom.
Yeah. Again, just picking up on the Clerk of Works. And we as an industry are quite traditional, linear, following very analog processes. And And I think it is that time now for us to really sort of take a step back and have a bit of a change in mindset to embrace some of the technologies that are out there, specifically around that area of clerk of works. It doesn't necessarily have to be a physical person on site. It can be a digital process. There's a lot of process now coming through in regulation to drive photographic evidence taken by qualified and registered people and registered to really assign. It's a bit of carrot and stick, because it gives people the ability to get qualified in that area, but it also assigns liability to that person. So they need to make sure what they're signing off and they're putting their name to is right and done properly. And it's that case. And again, when we're looking at product application or system application, there's technology out there to track and trace product through now. So RFIDs, so it's traceable for its life, up to the end where at its end of life, to look at how it can be recycled back into more of a circular economy. So it's a case of not just going back to what we did, because there's a lot of really key learning points to what we used to do in more traditional based contracting, where clear liability sat with principal designers, principal contractors, to learn how that approach can be brought into the modern world. And it's just an interesting point to raise.
Really good point. Stewart?
Yeah, sorry, not to pause anything. That's a really good point, Tom, about the things like IoT and the 5G network, the internet. These things are transforming the industry that we're in. AI is a really good example as well. So all the images that we're taking now with that mapper vehicle, instead of 2 years ago, we could take maybe 300 or 400 pictures per evening of houses, one elevation just going down the street. Now surveying at 30 miles an hour, we're now taking something like 10,000 images a night. That is too much for us to humanly sit and crop out windows and wheelie bins and doors and trees. So we've actually got everyone that works in our call centres, they're now training the AI software to say, that's what a window looks like, that's what granite looks like, that's a slate, that's a downpipe, that's a satellite dish, that's what slumped insulation looks like, that's damp, that's a crack. So every single instance of every defect we find on site is now going through that machine learning process, so that this coming winter we'll have trained it with, well, we've done probably about 80,000 images in the first month with that vehicle being on the road. But over the summer, that artificial intelligence will be hopefully so robust that this coming winter we'll be surveying 1 million houses, and it'll all be automated, visual and thermal images, all automated. So you remove that human speculation, because Raymond might approve something, you might say that's not good enough, and Keira might say, yeah, that's completely unacceptable.
Yeah. And
getting rid of that human speculation, actually saying you've got 18 pixels that equate to 0.4 square meters that are 0.1 degrees centigrade above what we would consider a U value of 0.2, it's a fail.
Yeah.
Or is it a pass? That's what we need to train the algorithms to do.
That's the real interesting piece, because I think a lot of people see this digital development as a threat to jobs, but in reality, it's there to aid and optimize. I was listening to something on the news yesterday about breast cancer screening and AI being introduced to that, and the fact that a lot of doctors and people see that as always computers taking over, but it's not. It's there to optimize and work with people, not to replace them. And I think we need to understand that it's not there to replace people, it's optimization.
Just on this topic, I think, Raymond, you've got an awful lot of experience with software and AI. What are your thoughts on it, and its role going forward in terms of the performance gap?
Yeah, I think some great points this morning. AI is a very fanciful thing that people will kind of think it can do everything. It's really it's quality in, quality out, isn't it? It's the old adage in anything. We get some funding from Scottish Government, I think last year, and which was helpful. And we've developed early days some AI run about SAP, which is very, very interesting, because we feel that SAP's a very complicated process of information, and we've done some very rudimentary stuff of just almost literally putting in a square meter area of house, and we can create a specification to comply. Very, very rudimentary at this point in time, but as we would expect, That's the first steps in it. But software's running at a pace in terms of, I think if there was a financial benefit to the industry, i.e. the developer or the contractor, they would be all over it today. They would be signing up, but there is no financial benefit to them. It tends to be, if we're using software and AI, we're bringing to light a bad news story, so therefore they shun it. But there's a whole number of things. I think we've done a lot of monitoring on houses for humidity, temperature. This is all old hat now. That story's already been written, but we're doing it. But it tends to be when there's a problem that we're getting in, we're putting monitors in and we're evaluating, we're taking external data, temperatures. Not very complicated in the terms of what's going on in the industry, but what it can do is set a benchmark of what's going on in a house. But I think AI is fascinating. We've got a team of 9 in-house developers, and we're working on a lot of nice stuff at the moment. And I think on the photographic evidence, I think Stewart touched on that. We're behind AutoBrel, which is a SAP supporting piece of software for taking images. And we're beginning to train that as well to recognise a good image and a bad image, because on site at the moment, all it's going to happen is if they can't, if the first image that they get is not perfect, they'll go and fix the wall, or they'll go and fix the detail, then they take a picture of it. And I don't think that's the answer. I think what we're trying to do is get a consistency of performance, but it's a bit like the robust details. We need to set a benchmark, and I think over time, software and AI and others will but we need the industry to go with us. I think that's the key bit, kind of go for. But a lot of exciting stuff kicking about.
Absolutely. Iain, we haven't spoken to you for a little while. What about snagging? I mean, we're talking about this conversation. I'm interested how far, how much it's been around technology and AI, etc. But what about traditional snagging? Is it, a practical or more antiquated practice?
Yeah, I sort of keep going back to my days on site. We would go work on a site and build these buildings, and then what we do today, I was going out snagging, and that was a new terminology for me, snagging. I said, what's snagging? We're going to solve all the problems that the job isn't being done quite right. So probably going back to Raymond's point of getting it right first time. Snagging's not a good example of getting it right first time. So I think it's unfortunate, but I don't think we should accept snagging. Just going back to what Raymond said, getting it done right first time, so you don't have to go back and do it right. I find it frustrating that it's acceptable to spend probably what your householder will never spend any more money on in one single item. But you buy a new house, you're given the keys, and right, you've got a year to tell us what we've not done right. Just doesn't seem correct. You wouldn't buy a car and you're given your keys and said, right, let us know how you get on in the motorway, and if there's any problems, you've got a year to tell us why the brakes aren't working. It just seems antiquated to me. I don't think we should accept it, if at all possible, and try and get away from that culture of having a year to tell you what's not being done right.
Yeah, I mean, I was amazed, just to comment on that, the amount of snagging companies that actually exist, and that's all they do. That's all they do. I was a judge for the House Builder Awards, and there was a category around service, and I think 2/3 of the entries were snagging businesses. And I thought, well, that probably doesn't look great for the house building industry generally. I mean, I think they do a good job and have good service, but I was shocked at the amount of them that were around. Stewart.
Yeah, I had first-hand experience of a site in Fort William in Bonnie, Scotland, where we were building. It was a big project, but one building was being built under a JCT80 contract, and the adjacent building was a design and build. And we drove Dundee to Fort William. It's like a 3-hour drive. We snagged one building. Contractor went, "Yep, I understand, no problem. I'll address all those problems." Went next door, did the next building, did a snagging list, and the contractor went, "Well, looks fine to me." That was it. Nothing was fixed. And you're talking about some architects can get a little bit picky as well. Keira, I had one of my bosses back in the day condemned all the skirting in a warehouse, timber skirting in a warehouse, offices attached to a warehouse, because it had too many knots in it. And the contractor had a hissy fit and said, look, show me a tree without branches and I'll show you wood without knots. And it was a great big standoff. But that one in Fort William was soul destroying for a young architectural guy to drive 3 hours to do a whole day's snagging and be told, nah, it's fine. It was just pointless. It was just a paper exercise. So I'm all for good quality snagging. It's part of the solution, definitely.
Yeah, it has to be good quality. Absolutely. Tom, what about the James has put a question on the YouTube feed here. Is there a need to test houses as opposed to components? Is that something you know a bit about?
Yeah, and it's almost tracked my career as well. We've done quite a lot of that. So back in the day, it was all around at a component level, what lambda is it? And then how does that component work in an element? We're now getting to the point where the critical pieces are starting to come into the junction details between elements within windows. But at a point of a complete house and applying a testing process which is scalable and commercially viable, we do need to, as an industry, identify those testing criteria that can be applied. In my mind, things like air tightness testing, heat loss coefficient in some of the quicker tests that are out there, to do a very quick test to set an industry level standard, so we know that if we get a result for an air tightness test or a heat loss, a global heat loss for the building within a range of a designed application, it's deemed to pass. What we are tending to find is there are a lot of snagging companies that are coming in now, and they're going in and saying, right, we're going to test the heat flux or the U value of this section of wall. And we all know if they're comparing that against a theoretical calc, like a U value, that U value is highly summarized. And any point selected on a wall is going to be influenced by a number of different variables. So you're unlikely to ever get the calculated U value in a measured point at that point location. So you're always going to raise infinite issues in a house. And it almost, as an industry, we do need to really set that right. If we're going to look at pre-completion testing to verify the theoretical design against the pre-occupation completed building, what are those tests? And we've been doing quite a bit of that in Salford. And in Salford, we've done the long-handed coheating test where you need an awful lot of academic grey matter and 2 weeks worth of testing, which definitely isn't commercially viable. We've done overnight quick tests for heat loss coefficient, which are getting more and more accurate compared to coheating, and we've done air tightness. And we have on that building tested and verified that we have within 3.8% reached the heat loss coefficient, and air tightness slightly exceeded the design value in a set process that can be replicated. And if we can do that within a scheme like robust details, because as a few people have mentioned on here, a robust design approach, it's almost not feasible to test every building, and some of the tests can't be done all year round anyway. But if we've got a process where there's a bit of a stick, it's governed, but there's also quite a bit of a carrot. There's a set of robust standard details that people can build to with that robust design in mind. We will really start to turn the corner in actually getting to that point of meeting in situ performance as designed, in my mind.
And in your opinion, Tom, I mean, how many of these as-built properties are as designed?
We did a bit of a test, and I can only reference some of the academic studies that have been done out there. There was a test done some time ago by Leeds Beckett, and they went out and reviewed and did coheating tests on a number of dwellings. And those dwellings varied from 6% compared to as designed, underperformance, so poorer, to up to 140%. And, you know, you look at 140%, you're like, good God, what are they testing? Has it got any windows or anything in it? So, you know, typically in that study, they found that the underperformance was around 30% from as designed to delivered and unoccupied. The other big point that is quite interesting to start to explore is what we're comparing it against, because a lot of the as designed is full of assumption-based processes, and a lot of those processes or figures are quite outdated. I mean, for one, there's tapping, so use of hot water, and assumptions on how people are using water. They're very old-fashioned. You're almost looking at how many baths did you take a week rather than how many showers do you have a day. So there's there would be some very positive moves to updating that type of data in the modelling, and to refine the modelling against the as tested and monitored buildings. So you've got that continuous circular loop, and we get into a more circular approach to construction. We learn from mistakes rather than make a mistake, forget about it, and go back and make it again on the next project.
Absolutely. Iain, what about refurbishment? How does refurbishment differ to new build in terms of performance? So, I mean, what's hidden in these existing structures that, for example, inadequate surveying hasn't picked up?
Yeah, I think refurbishment is a whole new world compared to building a house in an empty field. Arguably more complicated to refurbish a building to good standards, because you don't actually it all depends on how good the survey is done on the refurbishment project. You can get surveyors that can go in and have a quick look and suggest you need a timber rock expert to have a look at all the difficult bits that they don't want to get into. Or you can have a deep down survey done that actually identifies all the problems that the builder might come across, developer might come across during the refurbishment. So it's a lot more complicated, because you don't know what you don't know until you start lifting floors and finding, knocking walls down, plasterboard, what's actually behind it. So the new build side of things, I think is a lot easier, because you do know, or you should have a better idea than you do in refurbishment.
Right, again, just on refurbishment, Chris has asked, what do you recommend for retrofitting 60s to 70s houses with zero insulation? What's the most economic solution to increasing performance?
I'm looking at Tom there. I'm going to have to be careful what I say here. Obviously, Isover's very good. No, I use the phrase quite often. It depends on what you've got and what types of insulation you want to use on top of that. At Proctor's, we're quite isotropic, that we don't really have a favourite insulation as such. We used to, back in the day, we were styrofoam based, and styrofoam was the answer to everything. But now we realise holistically you've got to take the whole process into consideration. You want a breathable insulation if it's refurbishment. If it's a solid wall, do you want that wall to breathe? Then you'll have to use a breathable insulation. So you'll have to take every building into consideration. So to use an old technical Proctor's faithful term, I would use depends.
Good point. And I think, Chris, if you do want help from our technical team on that, Iain obviously can't go into product details today. Well, he could have actually, but he didn't. So our technical team would be happy to have a look at the drawings and see what we can do. Tom, did you have some comments?
Yeah, I was just going to add, because that specific period of time and buildings built in that time are probably one of the most awkward buildings to treat. We've done an awful lot of work on retrofitting solid walls as a country, and as a combination of countries. We know all the fail safes, almost the message in that area of less is more. Don't try and retrofit some of these properties to an extreme level if you can't look at a real deep retrofit, because you're often building in unintended consequences. But specifically in that 60s to 80s 50 mil narrow cavity, it is a bit of a nightmare, because you've got a cavity in the middle which can either act as a bypass if you're insulating outside, the insulating the cavity in its own right won't give a decent performance or a decent gain. So you've got to treat it, and you've got to treat it in both ways. You either, if you're insulating outside, you've got to fill the cavity. If you're insulating inside, potentially the cavity can stay as is. But then you've got to understand how everything else combines around it. And I do know this is a bit of a focus for people doing a lot of research in this area. A number of big academic institutions are looking at building these types of houses and testing them in controlled conditions as well as in the field, because they recognize there's an awful lot of building going on in that period, and a lot of houses that, like I say, are probably going to be more difficult to treat than your standard Victorian solid walls or some of the more modern day houses. But the key message at the end is, if we're building new build houses today, we shouldn't be building houses that need to be retrofitted in their lifetime. So it's sort of a key to say we are still building houses today, and probably for the next couple of years, that people will have a burden of a retrofit before we meet that national target of 2045, 2050 to get net zero as a country. So it's just one of those. Sorry, putting a message out there: stop building houses that they need retrofit.
It'd be a problem for our kids, absolutely.
Yeah.
Stewart. Oh, you need to unmute. Sorry, Stewart.
You're on mute. Yeah.
Sorry, I was about to do that, wasn't I? Just to echo your point about it depends. It is sadly the best answer there is, Iain, because it really does depend. It depends on an awful lot of things. But Private Eye magazine had an article recently, and they said the best thing we could do to save energy in this country is to retrofit houses with a dad to run around switching things off, which is probably quite true. But to your point, Keira, there's something like 80% of the buildings we'll be living and working in come 2050 are already here today. So the refurbishment market is a massive market. We can't just constantly keep rebuilding stuff. So addressing that sort of brownfield retrofit market is massive. But you can tell how I spend most of my free time. But there is a Tom Cruise movie, not a great Tom Cruise movie, called Vanilla Sky. And in that, his mentor says to him, if you ask the right questions, 99% of instances, the answer is money. And it usually is. When Iain was a young student doing his work experience, all that cheating and sloppy work was to save money. Yeah. And there are some contractors out there doing new build houses where they're given like 6 weeks to take a house from foundations to finished. And then when the tenant moves in or owner moves in, they're given that 12-month thing to say report any defects. So you get one winter where everything shrinks and things expand, and one summer where it goes the other way, and that's it. And we're building settlement and the amount of movement in timber frame kits that we get in Scotland, you need longer than that. But a lot of people aren't aware of the 10-year guarantees and things like that do come with things. But you need contractors to react to it as well and be open-minded that things aren't perfect, and it won't ever be perfect. But there is a school of thought about this golden thread to take things from the very start to the very end and maintain that integrity all the way through. There's lots and lots of research and documentation and legislation being drafted around that golden thread, and the BIM, the Building Information Modelling. Trustmark have a data vault of what's gone on, what's happened up and down the country. But everything boils down to money. We've got to make it economic for contractors to embrace robust details, sustainable best practice, manage the supply chain properly. There's all sorts of digital solutions. I mean, Mears have a system. We have a system here where if Tom was one of our joiners, he wakes up in the morning, he gets a list of materials and jobs on his PDA. Dewsons will get an alert to say, Tom will be in your warehouse at 8 o'clock. He needs these 10 things. The tenant gets an alert to say, Tom's on his way. You can track him like a DPD package. Then Tom has to take pictures before and after. He has to scan QR codes. Everything, every single nut and bolt we install is tracked and placed in one digital vault. But it's one digital vault that belongs to Mears. So if you sell your house and it owns to someone, all that information stays with us. It doesn't transfer to the next occupant or whatever else. And it's all social housing. So it's not private households. But we need those sort of mechanisms for every job. And tech can help, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And Raymond, what's your thoughts on, should there be financial penalties for poor construction or poor energy performance in the industry?
God, my lawyer friends would love that, wouldn't they? They'd become even more richer. Well, I think that it's mentioned a couple of times, the carrot and stick. Sarah, if we gave the construction industry another £20,000 a house to make them better, how much of that would they put on their bottom line as a profit line rather than actually making the house better? So I think the penalty bit would be, it's so difficult to identify that, because it's going to be perception of what's wrong and what's right, and I think that's where the arguments would start. So my bit would be is if a house performs badly, somebody should pay, whether it's the reputation, whether it's a cost penalty. We're seeing in the industry at the moment where clients are more savvy now, are actually trying to reclaim developers for energy bills, because their heating's not been working as well, or radiators are not working. So there's things going on out there at the moment that are interesting. And I go back to my original Facebook. I'm too old for Facebook. My wife keeps me updated what's going on in there. But there's an enormous amount of chats going out there, people sharing information, far more than the industry shares information about development. So the penalty bit is, I think, if you put a financial penalty on a contractor or anyone in their own life, we do take heed of things, and it's been able to then monitor that against a benchmark to say you failed. At Premier Inn, I think if you don't get a good night's sleep, you can get your money back. You go into McDonald's, and if the chips are cold, you could, they'll get some compensation. You get a free meal. So these benchmarks are already out there in industry. It's just our industry just is one of those weird concoction of things that's a bit mad at times. But yeah, I think financial penalties or reputational damage, something to just make people do things better, in that first principle mode of trying to get it right more the first time. We'll never get it perfect. The difference between brilliant and perfection is just too long, and it's almost not worthwhile. But yeah, some sort of mechanism. If you don't give me what I'm paying for, there should be a consequence. And going back to some of the things that was spoken about earlier on about the monitoring and things, there's so much more, I think, to go on in houses over the next 3-5 years about actually monitoring houses. And it's not the most difficult thing in the world if there's 70 houses for a developer to actually monitor every single part of that site in terms of energy consumption, and even have that data for themselves to just look at profiles of how those projects are going. The industry's not overly interested in that right now, but that's the easiest thing in the world. If there's a 70 house site, you could almost link it in through IoT monitors, or even use, the next step might be piggybacking the existing alarm system where you've got monitors in most rooms. It's just upgrade them in a way. Somebody will come out with that in the next couple of years. So we've already got some technology embedded in the houses. We can take data from that and just work out on an estate who's got the most efficient house on the estate. That might be the person who doesn't heat it, but we can find that out. We can find that out by just looking at their energy usage. So if people wanted to do it, we can do it. We can do it, and it goes back to Stuart's bit. It's about the cost of actually doing that. But yeah, I think there's a way to go, but there's technology out there we can do it. It's not a big problem.
Good. Right. Before I come to you, Iain, I'm just going to say, Steve, I've noticed your really interesting point about factory built housing. So I am coming to that. I think it's a very good, excellent topic to discuss this webinar. We won't miss it before the end. But Iain, did you have some comments to add to this current topic we're discussing?
Yeah, it was just a comment on money there. I think Stewart mentioned money and the carrot and stick. Raymond mentioned as well. I think it's more, we're talking about getting the drawing board drawings to be more like, or get the site to be more like the drawings. But there's more of a cultural shift required from the actual homeowner. You know, when they, what would be really interesting, or my pipe dream is for one day, people to talk about their house at dinner parties, that my house is great, I've got this insulation in, I've got a new vapor control layer from Proctor's, it's fantastic, it does all these things. It's a pipe dream, and nobody wants to come to my dinner parties, I realise, but you know, that's got to change. You know, it's not just gold taps in your bathroom and areas like that. You know, people should be striving. It'd be great if the tenant owner was striving for a better house and why it's a better house. That would be fantastic. But as I said, it's a pipe dream.
And I do think inadvertently with the cost of energy, homeowners are becoming more conscious. I'm not saying that's the right reasons, but there's definitely been a shift in some people's opinions in terms of the energy costs and how their house performs. It seems to be a lot more present in their decision making, the type of house they're choosing to build, move into, buy, etc. in my opinion. So
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, even in the pub, you hear people talking about the gas bill, or I've got a gas bill and it's ridiculous. And I'll ask them, what type of insulation have you got in the loft? Oh, I don't think we've got any. Well, do you not think you should put some in there? Oh, no, that's too much hassle. Take out all the items I've got stored in my loft. That's just too much hassle. Well, that gas bill isn't that much of a problem then. If you don't want to address it with a simple glass rule over the top of the joists in the loft. So, you know, culturally, people need to change, I think.
absolutely. Stewart.
Yeah, thanks, Keira. I've been advocating for like house MOTs for my entire career, saying, look, if you had a £500 car, you would spend 50 quid every year getting an MOT. But a £500,000 house, you don't do anything until it leaks, and then you panic, and then it costs you thousands. So yeah, I'd love to see people getting annual MOTs on their houses. But I did a little bit of research last year into how much available money the general public have. Like, why is retrofit so hard for everyone to get their heads around? And statistically, 30% of the people in this country have no savings whatsoever. 30% of people have got less than £1,000 in the bank. 30% of people have got less than £5,000 in the bank. And it's only 10% of people that have more than 5k in the bank. So when things like an air source heat pump cost 10, or EWI costs 15, it's a massive barrier. And despite everything, location, still the three most important things about house buying. And if there was one amazingly passive house, stunning looking thing that was too far away from the school, or my wife didn't like it, I'd buy the inefficient one, because my wife would like it. I'm very happy wife, happy life is still a very big thing. So yeah, we need to somehow culturally blend, but build it right. You know, insulate tight, ventilate right. I mean, that was drummed into me day one. And you mentioned about pre-made houses earlier. There's questions about modern methods of construction, offsite manufacture. When I first met your father, Keira, Alan Proctor came into my office and he said he'd been to Japan recently. And I'm going back 20 years. He'd been in Japan and saw a factory where one line in the factory was rented to a kitchen builder. Another line was Pilkington. Another line was something else, bathrooms and kitchens. And you sat down with an architect in reception, said, I want a typical 3-bed house. They showed you some designs. And 7 days later, that was delivered to your site. All you had to provide was land with, you know, hot and cold water coming in sort of thing, and drainage and gas or whatever. And they just brought it to you, bolted it together. That's a long time ago. But this sector, when I was in flat roofing, the sector took about 15 years to migrate away from boiling pots of bitumen on the roof to picking up blowtorches and melting felt and putting it on the roof. It took them another 10, 15 years to get away from that into mechanical fixings. by which time adhesives had come on board so fast with polyurethane adhesives, you're like, you don't need a blowtorch, you don't need a hot air gun, you don't need mechanical fixings, we can glue it on. And that's still mind-blowingly technical for most roofers, that you can use glue. And you're like, yeah, been bonding aircraft with glue for years, decades. Airplanes have been glued, and the doors fall out of them every now and again, I suppose. But for the most part, airplanes are quite good things. And they use adhesives, but yeah, it's a very conservative, risk-averse industry we're in, and it'll take decades for it to slowly adopt change. But it needs guys like us on this call and the people listening to this to push for it. We've got to innovate. We've got to keep pushing the technology and make it less risky to adopt change.
I agree.
I'll mute myself again.
No, I agree. And I definitely agree with the happy wife, happy life. We make all the decisions, so make your life easy. Tom.
Yeah, just to pick up on some of those points for Stewart, because I think we are just on the cusp of some major changes. I think all of the nations now are looking at decarbonising the grid, and we've been in quite a privileged scenario for building houses and we have made huge progressions in creating more of a fabric first approach, and then plonking a combi boiler in and you're done and dusted. And as that grid becomes more decarbonised and gas doesn't become an option for heating houses or providing energy to houses, there's a lot of quite complicated MEP or mechanical and electrical kit that's going to start to be designed into houses. And it's really, again, important. And that Stewart picked up on the fact that this mechanical and electrical kit is critical to the running of that house, not only to meet the energy, the demand that the house has been designed to deliver, but also for health for occupants, because we are talking now around air handling systems and heating systems, hot water systems, that all need to be connected. And it almost feels a little bit like a ticking time bomb, because people are just assuming that we'll take the same fabric or slightly better fabric, we'll plonk a few bits of MEP in there. Theoretically, in SAP, it all works. When it gets to the person in the house actually using that and then connecting all those bits of equipment, not only just to use them, because I've been involved in projects where we're looking at sort of future home standard houses. When we've got to the point of handing that to the end user, they need 12 apps to run 12 different bits of MEP, all at brand level, app level. So you've got 12 different accounts, 12 different bits of kit, which you've got to try and get working as the designer has assumed they're going to work. And then you've got to try and get them to work as a system when none of those apps connect or talk to each other. So I think there is a big bit that the industry needs to really get an understanding and learn from other areas in the industries. In the commercial sector, for years and years and years, we've had building management systems. And those sorts of bits of kit are going to need to start to come into residential. We can't just assume we build a fabric and plonk loads of kit in and people can use it.
Great point. Absolutely. Iain? You need to unmute. Sorry, Iain.
You're muted.
It's been that long since COVID, we've all forgotten how to unmute, you see.
So I'm just going back to my dream of the dinner party. It's a cultural thing that people need to change. The work that Tom's done in that sulphur project, it's fantastic to have a look at that building and see all the dynamics of electronics in there. But it's cultural that we need to change. I've been to conferences where people are talking about how energy efficient the houses are, and mechanical ventilation, extraction, and all the rest. But the residents still like to sleep with the windows open. And how do you change that culturally? Do you need to sleep with the windows open? Well, my mum and dad my granddad used to always, and I kind of like that air feeling about it. Even though they've got a great mechanical ventilation system there that can do that, they still like the feeling of an open window. So how do you change that structure? How do you change that culturally? And You know, there was another project where they were testing this project, very energy efficient. They had tests on every plug, and there was a peak at 12 o'clock at night, and they went to that resident and said, your house is running fantastically well, but there's a peak at 12 o'clock at night. What do you think that is? That's when the kids go down the stairs and use the toasting machine and make a midnight feast at night. You know, so how do you culturally change that? You know, I'm sure from what Raymond said, he could probably do that quite easily to change that cultural change of the toasties at 12 o'clock. But, you know, it's how do you change that? We can build buildings, we can get the builders to build the right things, but culturally people need to change as well.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Stuart.
Just very briefly about the cultural change, Iain. I was involved with a big chain of supermarkets a while ago doing surveys for them. And one of the surveys we did was actually survey around the chiller doors. And we found lots of cold air coming out because the seals were gone on the doors. And staff would leave the doors open because they were going in and getting milk and coming out and going in and coming out. And they just left the doors open to do it, which means the chiller's running at 100% capacity because it can't maintain the cold. And they overcame that, not by anything high tech. They put a vibrating buzzer on the manager's belt. And every time the fridge door opened and was open for more than 5 seconds, it didn't stop vibrating and buzzing. And it drove the manager mad. And he just shouted at everyone and said, shut the door. There was no amount of tech or incentives, just annoy him. But I would love to have a house that was intelligent enough that it did it itself. It opened the windows if there was too much humidity. It switched the heating on and off. Everything was intelligent. It switched the heating on when I was 5 minutes away in the car. But also if it started developing damp, I'd love some kind of sensor that phoned Tom and said, hey, Tom, come round to my house and knock on the door and proactively stop that from becoming big and expensive. And is that a 50 quid a month service that people then subscribe to, and it's intelligent house as a service? Something like that. Would people pay it? Don't know, probably not, but there's maybe a business in there for someone to go and start.
Yeah.
Raymond?
Yeah, just picking up on Tom had mentioned about the new kit, I suppose, that's getting put onto houses for the future home standards. The big push towards air source heat pumps and PV and battery storage is stuff, and we have a financial interest in a company in that market space. And if you thought the building industry, just in terms of fabric and air leakage and acoustics, was complicated, go and speak to these people. That becomes significantly more complicated. You know, even the fights about how they put their systems together, whether they use buffer tanks or thermostats. So our industry doesn't talk as one. I think that's the big thing that I've learned over the years, is that the house is a location or a postcode that we live in, and then within that house we've got our family set up that we've got, and techie people get really interested in the dynamics of it. But there's no one voice in that house, is there? It's and software down the line. Well, I think I read somewhere that in your car you've got something like a couple of hundred sensors in your car these days, and the average cost of a car might be 50 grand or 60 grand, depending on what it is. And yet in our house we'll probably get, I don't know, half a dozen sensors, something like that. So I think that shift will move over time, but I think it needs to be, when we look at the amount of money that's been spent in compliance software, whether it's SAP and all the energy certification, and there's very little in the market that's compliant, that needs to be done in terms of performance software. And I think unless the regulation changes, and that's a long journey to actually say you need some sort of performance software to make sure what you've designed actually performs. And maybe that's where that links into the penalty factor, that the developers and contractors will get it right as well if they're being monitored over time. But unless and I love software as a service, Stuart, we make half our living on that. But I think it almost needs to be embedded in the financial model. So without going off track at the moment, we speak to some of the banks at the moment, and they're suddenly becoming interested because they hold the mortgage on houses. And in the commercial, the housing associations have major issues, because they're sitting with an asset today. I don't know, let's say 70 flats in a block, the asset value might be 2 million, but they're now having to rework that to say, well, what's that? That asset value might be significant. It might actually be at zero because of the amount of work that they would need to do in the future to have that to a standard that people will want to rent. So there's a lot of dynamics, and I think the financial markets will be the one that pushes and pulls it. Yeah, just interesting days, interesting days.
Thank you, Raymond. Just before I come on to the modular offsite side of it, I just wanted to add something into your comments and Stuart, yours about the cultural side of it. I mean, for me, I'm certainly noticing that it is quite a generational thing. I think there's a lot more education going on now, you know, in schools. Even my little boy at nursery is learning about, I don't know why they're teaching an almost 3-year-old about global warming and that kind of thing, but it seems to be there's a lot more education around it. And even if I think about this organization, so at Proctor Group, you know, the people that are really interested in, with the exception of Iain, who's very interested in sustainability, carbon reduction targets that we're putting into the business, and you know, sustainability of our products and where we're sourcing things from a carbon footprint point of view, raw materials, it really tends to be, I think, some of the younger generation who seem to have, in my opinion, a lot more kind of social responsibility around how they live. And there's a lot more interest. You know, it's not cool to be not caring for the environment and for the future generations, etc. So when I was that age, it didn't matter. You know, just there was no interest at all, no education at school. So I think there is hopefully some cultural change coming across universities and schools and whatnot, which will kind of imprint on the future generations, and I think we're seeing it already, so long may it continue. Raymond?
Yeah, I just want to put a disclaimer on this for myself. Nobody should ever listen to me about anything, because I've been travelling for the last week and come home yesterday. We've been abroad, and my daughter kind of uses our house as a kind of semi-hotel at the moment. She's 25, so she comes in fake tans and eats food and goes away and comes. So anyway, in our utility room at the back, I went into the utility room and there's all these cans of diet juice sitting there in a tray. And my first concept was, why does she not tidy up? I then take that and put it in the blue bin because I'm very responsible. And an hour later, she appears and asks me where the empty cans of juice were, because she was going to take them to Lidl to recycle them. So there was me this morning in the blue bin, taking the tins back out to put in there. So you're right, it is a cultural thing that there's dad coming home thinking this house is a bit of a mess, and my daughter's actually get those cans to take back to Lidl to recycle them. So maybe you shouldn't listen to me too much in life.
And I'm sure a lot of, you know, older people, you know, have interest in it as well, but certainly I'm seeing a change, which is fantastic. Long may it continue. So for the last kind of 5-10 minutes, if we could just give the whole concept of offsite and, you know, modular construction a little bit of time. Tom, probably a good place to start with you, really, based on your experience of some of the offsite stuff you've been involved in.
Yep.
Is this going to help solve the performance gap? I mean, what's your general thoughts on it?
Again, from a fabric perspective, you can start to build in a robust approach, because you are in control of the build-ups and materials. You've got proper factory process controls behind it. You can have a sign-off process, and the quality control process within the factories are auditable. So you can start to really get to a level and an offer that works, but it does all stem around the considered design of everything else around it. So if you're using, say, an offsite timber frame kit, it's closed panel, it's got to be detailed correctly with the floor cassettes, with the roof systems, and then beyond the fabric, it's got to be detailed with the energy systems that are going into the house. So whilst it is part of a solution, and some of the volumetric applications where you've got everything under one roof could drive things even further if a successful business plan can be found in that area, because at the moment it's not the most flexible of areas. It does really need to be refined in terms of what you can buy, almost down to a car model, which doesn't always fit with what people want as a consumer. They don't all want the same size box with the same kit in it, which in reality is the only way that sort of scale the scale in that sector can be met to make it commercially viable in a factory setting. So the sweet spot in offsite seems to be around 2D manufacture, 2D delivery, but there is still within that, you're minimizing some of the risk, but you're not minimizing everything. And it does need everything that we've talked about on here around properly considered design, properly signed off with site activity, and an auditable trail to actually say, well, this was delivered in this way. Well, from the very start, it was designed in this way to meet this brief, delivered through this factory using these materials, installed in this way, and commissioned with everything else it needs to create a habitable dwelling. So it's got similar problems. It's just streamlining parts of it.
Excellent. And I think Tom Jarman's point on YouTube, it isn't a magic bullet. And his point was, if you're a poor client for traditional built housing, you're probably a poor client for MMC as well. So I think that's a really, really valid.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Good. And Stephen, thank you for your input today. So yeah, not the full answer. Offsite manufacture is far better than site build. And I think, again, from a sort of predictability of how you're putting these materials together, grasp that as well.
Oh no, I mean, from my side, I'd always say it's better because we've got a big offsite business supplying all sorts of timber frame, light gauge steel frame and concrete roofing and floor solutions. But again, they're elements. And where that middle ground, that sort of sweet spot is all around elements, and it's not a full building. So the more complete that building becomes, the more you can control it. But a complete building doesn't necessarily fit the brief, like I mentioned. So we've got to find the middle ground.
Good. Raymond?
Yeah, just interestingly enough, I was reading something in the last couple of days traveling, is some of the major financial failures in offsite construction in terms of some major investments in the last 10 years that just haven't, some real smart money, some real smart people, good intentioned, and I think, there's probably a couple of £100 million actually been lost in some big companies. So I'm a great believer that there's a major role for that, and system providers. I'd like to just know a bit more myself, why these big companies have actually went under in terms of modern methods of construction, offsite manufacturing. Just seems to be a couple of big fields, not on the performance of the product, but on just the financial. They're just not getting the numbers right at the moment. But winners will appear as they always do, and no doubt the next couple of years they'll get that even better. It just kind of concerning that the amount of money has been thrown at it, and so much has been lost.
Yeah, it's definitely got its area. But it's aiming in where it does benefit. So things like utility cupboards, highly urbanized areas, it really does work. But as you mentioned, Raymond, it doesn't work for everything. It's not a magic bullet, silver bullet for everything. And we have worked within the supply chain to some of the major volumetric suppliers. And some of the work that we've done with them is looking at the amount of variation they've got and how they're truly meeting a design for manufacturing assembly based approach. And we were working with one which sadly is no longer around, but they had 5 standard SKUs to develop 2 house types. And that's what they thought they were manufacturing. They thought they were manufacturing 5 products. When you actually looked into it, they had 950 variations of those products, which in a factory setting, in a production setting, isn't commercially viable.
Yeah.
So it's just getting the balance of how far you take it in different parts of the building to full buildings, and making sure it's the right product for the brief that you're trying to meet.
Iain, any final thoughts?
I think it goes back to, again, the cultural change. There's a lot of benefits of building buildings and factories and then bringing it out on site, whether it be volumetric or flat pack. There's some great technology there. Culturally, people have to be embracing this type of technology. If you ask people, would you like to buy a prefab house? That's a no-no in most people's mind, but it needs to be changed from that mentality. When I was in Japan, a delegation looking at offsite technology, in the high street, you could go out on a Saturday afternoon and do your shopping, and then drop into the house building company and actually order a house. So you picked your bathroom, you picked your bedroom, what you were going to use in your kitchen, all that together. But it was a design freeze. So when you ordered it, that was it. You weren't able to change it and, oh, can I move the window around that way? And, you know, it was a design freeze. But culturally, it fitted in the Japanese world. That's fine, because they were only building a house for maybe 30 years. And then it would be knocked down and they'd build another one. So culturally, it needs to change what you can use. There's some great technology, as Tom says, in the flat packing modular world. It just needs to be embraced a bit more, I would say.
Indeed.
I don't think we're too far away, Iain, from living in a Samsung house or an Apple house or a Google house or an Amazon home.
Mhm.
You can order a flat packed ship container Amazon house right now. It's literally a ship's container with the sides fold down, and it kind of quadruples in size once you build it. You can pop on YouTube and see that. It's not something I'd like to live in, but yeah, I think companies, because of the loss of investment, it's going to take someone with very deep pockets to say we're churning out houses. And if you look at the car industry, 20 years ago, the Toyota Prius was a rare sight on the road. Fast forward to today, it's 23% of new car sales last year were electric. That's, for the construction industry, that's rapid, because we are still building houses the same way we were 300 years ago. Worse in some regard.
Absolutely. Things are changing quickly, not quite as quick in construction, but we're getting there. Good. Well, listen, that's been a really good discussion today. We're slightly over our time, so thank you to all the listeners that remained to continue the conversations. And I just want to thank all the panelists for joining today and giving up your time to come in and have these chats, because I think it's so beneficial to people in industry and to companies like Proctor to hear advocates' thoughts on how we can change things for the better in the future, and where we see things going. So thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a very quick reminder for anyone that's watching, please pop this in your diary if you're free. Friday, the 3rd of May, normal time of 10 a.m, I will be with our technical team discussing pitched roof designs, technical webinar, and some of our next generation products. There's been quite a great chat on the YouTube feed today, and I'm sorry I haven't managed to comment on everyone's reflections and comments on the conversations, but I love it when the YouTube feed's busy with people commenting and putting their personal opinions across. Invites for Iain's dinner party will be going out at some point. I'm sure there's quite a lot of interest on that, Iain. I'm not saying I'll be there, but no, I'm kidding. So you can go to our webinar page today and download your personalised CPD certification. Anyone that's registered, you'll receive an email with a follow-up. Now, that normally has a short survey on it. Please fill it out, because it gives us feedback about what you enjoyed, what wasn't so good. Be polite, but we do take it constructively and help it to shape future webinars that we do. So we really do want your feedback. If you enjoyed today, give us a thumbs up on the video, and please subscribe to our channel, and that will keep you informed of what's coming next without us having to bug you with e-news. So you'll get that automatically. So thank you very much indeed. I wish you all a lovely weekend. I hope you've got some nice plans as the better weather's coming out, and we will hope to see you on the 3rd of May. Thank you all.